Welcome. Today's stream is going to be about my favorite things in version 10. We just released version 10 here last month, and so far it's been one of our biggest releases. There was over 150 new features last time we counted. And today I'm only going to be kind of covering 4 of my top favorite, unless you count Linux as 2. So the 4 things that I'll kind of be covering are our new Linux features, which are probably my favorite and I think are the coolest of everything that we've added so far. NAS Backup, some of our cloud features, mostly dealing with the capacity tier, and then our instant recovery additions, like instant disk recovery to VMware, which is extremely fast. So taking a look at Linux, we added 2 major features in the Linux category. The first is Linux Proxies, meaning we can have Linux proxies added into our backup infrastructure. They no longer have to be just a Windows machine, and we're able to add them through here. The other thing is XFS repositories. We've added fast clones with the reflinks technology. It's the equivalency of REFS block cloning technology to equal the fast clone technology with the underlying metadata replication. Next, we're actually going to configure one of those proxies. And in this case, I'm going to be using a CentOS 7 box. I already installed it with the GUI interface. One of the first things that you need to do with that machine is add disk enable UUID into the machine itself on VMware. So we'll actually turn that off so we can edit the configuration. It is perfect. So in order to update the configuration inside of VMware, you just come over to Actions, Edit Settings, the VM Options, Advanced, and Edit Configuration. This can be done directly through a VMX file configuration edit, but when VMware added the ability to do it this way, there wasn't really a reason to continue to update your VMX file manually. So in order to add it, it's just disk.enable UUID, and then make sure you set the value to true. And since the VMX file has been edited, we can go and turn that on, and you can confirm that the configuration edit was successful by going to Monitor and Task. The reconfiguration of the machine should be complete, and it should be a green check. And we'll watch this machine come on here. And the next thing that you need to do is enable the ports 22 for the SSH and 2500 to 3300 for the data mover services. Now in our case, we're going to go ahead and do that through command line, and then I'll show you where to we will do it through command line and then show where you can get into the interface to see the firewall to confirm that it took. Alright, this is an elevated command, so we do need sudo, and then it's going to be firewall-cmd --zone. And this case is going to be the public zone. If you've made custom zones, of course, change which zone that you are configuring. And then --add. And then you'll do -port for which port that we're configuring. We'll start off with 22, and it will be TCP. And in the same line, we can do add again, -port. And it does allow us to do a port range, and there does have to be an equal sign back here. Oops. And 2500 2300 to 3300. And I apologize for the typing. I have a brace on one of my wrists, so my hand's going a little crooked. And then it's /TCP. Now this will update the firewall through the command line for your public zone. You'll add the port 22 TCP and the range 2500 to 3300 TCP. And it's going to have us do the password. And I need to make sure I put 2 L's in wall. Anything typed with the right hand today is going to be all wonky. So that's successfully added those ports. So we're actually going to check the firewall itself. And if we go over here and we can just type in our search firewall, it'll pop up. And of course, it wants to make sure we have permissions to be here. From the public zone here, we'll go over to ports, and we can see that those were successfully added in. And that's everything that you need to do with a proxy, at least in a CentOS box, from a default install of CentOS in order to be able to add it as a proxy. So what I like to do is add the Windows machine first. You need that IP address. And these will have to be elevated credentials. In this case, I am just going to use the root account. And we'll hit apply. It's going to tell us that we need to accept the thumbprint. Now the Linux proxy is only able to use virtual appliance mode. And we'll see that when we go ahead to add the proxy up here. So we're going to add a VMware proxy, and when we select from the drop-down menu that Linux appliance, you can see how the transport mode goes to virtual appliance mode only, and we're not able to configure which data stores that it's actually communicating with. This part, unless you have specific traffic rules to your infrastructure, there's nothing that you'll need to set up under traffic rules at all. And I guess it didn't take the UUID configuration change. That's interesting. So let's see if we can do it. And it's going to be our Linux proxy. Next. Yep. And it's going to reboot it for us, it looks like. And that's it. That proxy is in there, and we can even disable our regular backup proxy and force our backup job to then use that proxy we just configured. But if you do want to manually select it so that it's the only one, it's under the properties, the storage settings, and here instead of having to disable anything. And let's start. And that one works. That is the Linux proxy here, and as you can see, it's only using hot add mode for all of its disk. Moving on to the next feature that was kind of a nice add-in to backup and replication is our NAS Backup. So that means no more need to support the NDP protocol, which is legacy and terrible and old, and it is awful to scale. And not only did we add in NAS Backup, it's completely storage agnostic, and it uses a file hierarchy system for thumbprinting files to be able to see what needs to be backed up without scanning the entire directory. So an example, if it was going through a file directory that's been added in, it would take a look at, say, the C drive and says, hey, has the C drive changed? And it could say yes or no. If it said yes, then it would go into the C drive and it would check all of the files in here, or folders in here, and say, hey, have any of you changed? And if it just happens only the backup folder is changed, then the only folder that we would go any further into is the backup folder to see what else has changed. And again, it'd be, or go through here and see which files have changed. So we're granularly only backing up the folders that have changed without having to back up the entire directory or read every single file and folder in a file like server or share in order to process only what's changed. To add any type of file share in, you can add it through add file share, and we can work with file servers, NFS shares, and SMB shares. It doesn't have to be NetApp, doesn't have to be Nimble, doesn't have to be HPE, it doesn't have to be name any vendor. It can just be a straight agnostic file reading protocol in order to be able to add it in. In this case, I've added in an SMB share, and we have the addition of what's called file proxies. File proxies just process shared jobs, but they can be the same proxies that you're using in your infrastructure already. If you add in a file share, it'll automatically make the Veeam server your first proxy before doing anything else. One of the advanced settings that helps set it apart as well is having the Microsoft VSS snapshot to have consistent states of files. And if you are doing a backup directly of a share, sometimes you can run into lock files on that share if they're already opened by another source. So what we will do is process every file we can, and then we'll continue to try to come back at the end of the job to try to process that again. And then if we're still unable to process that file because it's being opened, actively worked on, we'll give you a warning letting you know that that has happened. And that's all you need to know when setting up the file proxy. As for the job, there are some newer settings there as well. So whenever you're creating the job, it looks very familiar. You're creating a name, you're adding in a source, and when you add in the source, it can be sub-levels of shares that you've already added in. First off, you can send this to deduplicating appliances like Exagrid. You can send these to another share, you can send these to a local drive, and you can even send it off to a sober if you have one configured. The first section here is for how many versions of the files of how many days that you would like to keep back. And then you have the option to archive older versions of those files to a secondary storage. This again can be a local drive, this can be a share, it can be any type of standard repository for that matter, as well as a deduplicating appliance, and you can select object storage here to be able to send it off to an archive tier on an object storage branch. Another big thing to consider is when you're backing up, by default, the folder level permissions are the only things, like attributes and permissions are saved initially. It's a much faster process, and most times that we find customers restore a directory, there's not granular permissions within that directory, but an entire directory inherency. So it's faster to back it up and allow your file directory to run an inherency on restore, which is why this is the default setting here. All these other sections, really nothing's changed. And again, schedule, everything else is the same, but this is the fastest type of NAS backup without using the NDP protocol and being completely agnostic like we like to be. I'd say the next kind of feature set that I've become really fond of is our cloud tier. Now, our cloud tier is something that we can add into a scale-out backup repository, but we're just going to go ahead and add in the object storage here. And in this case, it's going to be Amazon S3, because Amazon S3 has a new feature that we're able to offer, which is our immutability. And immutability allows blocks to be locked on the storage, so it's almost the equivalency of having a rotating drive that's offline, because you can't change these files, no one else can change these files, and it's great. And you just have to add in your folder here, and I already have a v10 backup folder. Now, limiting on object storage is a soft limit. So if you have a hard limit for how much that you're allowed to store there, I would set it a little lower because the job will complete before it stops. Immutability is the amount of days back, which will increase the cost because those blocks may be tied to older change, which those blocks will be needed for a restore in the future. Infrequent access storage is another thing that we've added in for sending off GFS points to an archival tier. Create and finish. And we can go ahead and configure a scale out backup repository here, which is, let's see if it likes my share. There it goes. We're just going to stick with data locality, and now this capacity tier is the one that we've just added in, which is the object storage one, and the greatest feature that we have added in for the capacity tier, which is copy mode, meaning that your chains no longer have to be sealed and complete before sending off to object storage. As soon as a backup is finished in the cycle, it'll start copying that backup off-site, so that you have a chain in the cloud immediately and not, 7, 10 days, 30 days later. Or even in backup copy jobs where you have a continuously running job, you don't have to wait for a GFS point to be created and sent off before your backups are protected. And then the move backups allows you to get that off of your local storage like we had before. And that was it. And the other great thing about being able to add in that object storage locally, you can import backups that are already on that object storage, and that allows you to do restores of like Veeam Backup for Azure, Veeam Backup for AWS to a local machine if we still have access to that object storage, if you're not wanting to restore that data locally in the cloud, or local to the cloud from the object storage for our other products. We can also do Veeam Office 365 backups, being able to import that same object storage location. What we have here is last is the instant recovery. Our instant recovery has a new feature for a faster caching system. This allows everything to be restored faster back to VMware. We can restore agent backups now. We can restore just about anything that you've backed up back to VMware at this point, including AWS. And in this demonstration, we're actually going to be doing an instant recovery of a disk, because it's also one of the new features that we've added, and it is, for lack of a better way to put it, stupid fast. I will give one piece of warning, because I thought I would try it while testing, is I thought it might be fun to see what would happen if you instant recover a disk to a machine that is still running. What I found is most of the time it did not end well. The guest OS would crash because of something to do with the VMX configuration file and it losing access to its disk between a snapshot and an updated VMX file. It just didn't end well. I'd recommend powering off the machine before trying to do an instant recovery to whatever machine that you choose to do the instant recovery to. And I'm actually going to make sure this machine is in fact offline, and it is. So we should be good to start the instant recovery. Now we're going to be doing an instant recovery of the secondary disk on this machine and not the other one. This is great if you don't want to restore the entire machine or have to power off your production machine just to get back, say, a section or a database or a failed piece of hardware for that matter. So right now we're already to the point of publishing the files because it's already locked them. That part's done. It's attaching that disk to the machine, and it's done. If we come over here, we should almost instantaneously be able to see that disk attached and edit settings, which we can. And let's power on that machine to see it on the guest level. And we can come up and see the instant recovery from here. So if we come down here and go through disk management, onlined it. Basically, we online the disk, and it is now here. It's inherited the name that it had previously, and we can see this fake, really important database file. Now, for fun, let's see what happens when we stop publishing, because that's the question, right? If we stop publishing while it's actively connected. The only time I saw it crash, and it was a hard OS crash that VMware Tools reported, was putting the disk on, not removing it. And from here, it closed my browser and it removed it from disk management. But we can probably test what it looks like whenever you instant recover to a live. Now, I did do this to a SQL server, so it may have been a slightly more touchy than doing it to just a generic Windows machine, because this has no applications on it. If you unpublish a disk, yes, all changes are going to go poof, because you're doing a redirect just like you would with any other instant recovery from Veeam, and you decided that you were done and you unpublished. You'd have to migrate to production and then backup, or try to vMotion it somewhere else and save it there to be able to save any types of changes. That too, you can clone the machine. And let's watch what happens to our machine. So far the configuration went through, and in this case the machine came back up with the disk, and it was still online. Yay, Windows caching. So in this case, when my machine was not running SQL and just generic Windows, it did not crash when adding a disk live. The last thing that I found was a really cool thing that we added in was an additional type of retention. I don't know how many times I've tried to do math for jobs that run more than once a day on how many days worth of backups that you want to get or save or keep on file, or worry about leap year or a short month or a long month, or just the headaches trying to figure out how many restore points per how many hours plus full backups in between, which take up X number of hours, and having enough points. This is one of the ways I think we've made retention so much easier. And those are, in fact, the top things that I like about version 10 that's come out. Mostly the Linux proxies, and the Linux proxies went by, for the most part, nice. That is all I had for you guys.